Hi guys, this video is going about how far Adolf Hitler controlled the lives of young people in Nazi Germany. Obviously the instruction of its youth was massive to the Nazis because they wanted a thousand years of Nazi rule. So the idea was really to indoctrinate, brainwash the young people so they would grow up to be Nazis, and this would just keep going and going, and they would bring Nazis up and the process would repeat. Hitler himself was very open, saying he wanted his young men to be as swift as greyhounds and as hard as Krupp's steel. So as swift as greyhounds and as hard as Krupp's steel. C-R-U-P-P-S, Krupp's steel. Now, in Germany, school was compulsory until age of 14. Usually it was separate schools for boys and girls. Okay. When the Nazis come to power, they put a former headmaster called Bernhard Rust in charge of the schools. He had previously lost his job in 1930, I believe, because he was seen as being mentally unstable, so he wasn't fit to work at a school, and the next thing he's the chief of education. When will you ever see that happening, I guess? Alright, Michael Gove. Basically what you see straight away is Jewish and anti-Nazi teachers were fired. So any teachers who were Jewish or any teachers that didn't agree with Nazi views were fired. You could be a very, very well qualified teacher but not a supporter of the Nazis, and you wouldn't get a job as a teacher. So being a member of the party, or at least a supporter of the party, was just as important as your qualifications and teaching ability in those days in Germany. And Rust basically was very open and said the whole purpose of his education was to create Nazis. Jews, originally there was only allowed to be 1.5% of the school's population as Jewish, and Jewish children would be overly picked on. They would be identified for any stereotypical differences. They would be sat separately. Any child who reported being bullied to the teacher who was Jewish would get no support. I've seen an image of a Jewish child brought to the front of the class, and they've got a stereotype on the board, and they're pointing out what the Jewish child is in comparison to the stereotype. So it's ridiculous. And all subjects on the curriculum were basically a reflection of what Nazi views were. So the betrayal by politicians, and at the end of World War I, that was taught. Germany's in history. Germany's great future would have been taught in history. Germany's great past would have been taught in history. Biology, all about the supremacy of the Aryan race, blonde hair, blue eyes. In girls' schools, girls will be taught to grow up to be women, to have children, but also the race views behind it of why they needed to have Aryan pure blood children. In maths, even the maths questions in textbooks, I know it's a talking point at the minute about the orange sweets or something on an Excel maths paper, but maths textbooks back then would have sums in. There's one, the famous one is about the fighter plane takes off to bomb Warsaw International Centre of Jews. It has this many tons of bombs on and goes this far on the fuel. How much fuel does it have left after it's bombed? And it describes it as a crusade, so it puts it in a good light. So children will be getting hit with this propaganda throughout school. Even when children were little, their books like The Poisonous Mushroom, The Toadstool, The Gift Pills as it was called, GIFT, PILZ, taught of Jews being paedophiles and preying on the innocent German, usually German female child, etc. So this was hitting throughout, from young children all the way through to when kids left school at 14, and then in propaganda that was out in public anyway. The Nazis also set up Napola schools, Napola, and basically this was to create future political leaders of the country, so they put the best children in these. They didn't really have much of an effect because there was only about 41 of these by the end of World War II. Universities, very, very similar. 1933 to 1939, about 3,000 lecturers, professors, doctors at uni were sacked because they weren't Nazi or they were Jewish, held anti-Nazi views, etc. Famous thinkers like Einstein, professor, leave Germany because he's Jewish, his views would be rejected. And because obviously they're building this master race with the aim of war, etc., and they've got the whole like Reich Arbeitstein's Labour Front and such going, and factories are important for the production of like war materials and the like. University was no longer seen as important, so in 1933, when the Nazis came to power, there was approximately 130,000 students at university. This has dropped to 60,000 at the start of World War II in 1939. If you were a student, you would still have to keep your hand in with the Nazis by doing 4 months at an SA camp, and university education became so Nazi indoctrinated that physics and its teaching had to be changed because Einstein was a Jew, that they wanted to reject his theory of relativity, so they had to change the rules of physics to basically attack a Jew in Einstein. The Nazis also had youth groups. The most famous was the Hitler Jugend, or the HJ, or as we might know them, the Hitler Youth. And you would go into the Hitler Youth as a boy at the age of 14, but you could join, a bit like the Scouts, you could go in their version of the Cubs beforehand, so it was called Pimpfen, P-I-M-P-F-E-N, the little fellows, and they would graduate up to the Hitler Youth. And this was huge because before Hitler came to power as Chancellor in 1933, there were only 100,000 in the Nazi youth groups. This swells to 6 million by 1936, and that's about 60% of boys in Germany. By 1939, it was actually 90% of German boys, approximately. It never gets to 100% because some families just couldn't support sending their children into the Hitler Youth with the monthly subscription fee parents would have to pay, and buying uniform and the like. So it never got to 100%, but it did get to 90%, which is huge. Other youth groups, such as the Catholic youth, were closed, sent off into the Hitler Youth because they wanted to brainwash with Nazi ideas. And the view behind the Hitler Youth was physical fitness, obedience, and even like weapons training. So you'd see a lot of like hikes, a lot of running, a lot of boxing, etc. You would see obedience taught, and you would see the wearing a uniform being accepted, and weapons training and such, and these hikes, like long weekends where they'd go away into camps, because they were trying to create their army of tomorrow. They were trying to create future soldiers. The camps were seen as exhausting. There was, there's reports of children who've had flu and cold still had to go to the camps and then had to do their marches and came back even worse because of it. So the boys would be the future soldiers and SS, etc. Girls at that time were basically put into what was called the Bundesdeutsches Mädel, or the League of German Girls, and the idea behind it was to make them strong mothers, to make them housewives, and to prepare them for this in the future. It didn't necessarily achieve the aims that would be thought, because what happened was there was a lot of obviously like towns and villages in Nazi Germany where it was very, very sheltered. So there was very much like a sheltered life for girls who lived out of the cities, etc. And what happened was when when these girls joined the BDM, the League of German Girls, they would, be taken like to new experiences, taken away from the villages, seeing life outside of the village. So it actually took girls away from a sheltered lifestyle for the first time, and actually unwittingly actually broadened their horizons. So yes, they were creating the wife, the mother type thing, but they were also, the unintended consequence was it broadened girls' horizons because it took them out of the villages, in many cases for the first time. Now, you'll know, being teenagers yourself, that any type of authority is bad authority. So sometimes teenagers will just rebel for the hell of rebelling and being against something. And you saw, and it's again this question of how far did Hitler control children. There were children who rebelled against Hitler, right? Rebelled against Nazis, in some cases because it was just something to rebel against, but this did progress over time. So you usually found when children could leave school at 14 and they might be forced into the Reichsarbeitsdienst, the Labour Front, by 18. There's this 4-year gap of what's happening. And what you usually found is these anti-Nazi gangs were aged 14 to 17 years old, outside of the school system, not yet in the work system. And they basically, they did react against authority and being told what to do, and just wanted to rebel against what was seen as normal, so they didn't want to conform. But they did go from being seen as irritating by the Nazis to being actually seen as subversive. So a group called the Edelweiss Pirates, which was a common term for a lot of the youth groups put together, actually were blamed for putting British anti-Nazi propaganda that was dropped into Germany and spread by resistance groups. They were blamed for posting it through people's letterboxes. So this went from being an irritant to something that was potentially very dangerous to Hitler during the war. So you had like the Edelweiss Pirates, very much like hippie-ish, grew their hair a bit longer, would sing songs, would do their own hikes. They wouldn't have separate groups of boys and girls. They would hang out together. There was the Navajos that were part of this, which is named after the Native American Indians. And then you've got the swing movement as well, which was hugely dangerous to Hitler, with the swing movement, because they also grow their hair in the British fashion. They wore the British clothes like the max, the top hat, carry the umbrella, wear the waistcoat, etc. But they would listen to swing music, which was coming in from America. So it was often by Jewish or black musicians like Louis Armstrong, Count Basie, etc. And this could be very dangerous, because the Nazis were teaching you that, like, they are the best, they are the master race, they are the best at everything, they are the people you should aspire to be. But if your hero is a Jewish musician, you may start to doubt that. Yeah, so you might think, well, actually I prefer this Jewish music, I like what I'm hearing here, I don't want to listen to the German music, so they can't be the master race. Also, I don't want to go against my idol, my role model, be it a black American like Louis Armstrong or a Jewish American. And this music was actually banned by Hitler. Swing music was banned by the Nazis, but it still found its way in under fake labels on the record sleeves, which obviously the swing movement would know. You know that if you buy that, that white label there, you're really getting you know, Count Basie, for example. And also you could buy it from sailors who were coming into the docks from America and selling these bootleg records at extortionate prices. So the swing movement was seen as very dangerous. They didn't like it. It was totally different. It was seen as sexual and provocative, the music that was coming from America, the jazz and the blues, compared to the slower waltzes that were encouraged with the Nazis. Edelweiss Pirates wore the Edelweiss flower in their blazers, a little pin badge. They had the longer hair, the guitars as well. They would, you know, talk about music that was coming in from France, Britain, etc. There was talk that they graffitied the subways that people would walk through with slogans like "Down with Hitler." A common punishment for these groups used to be shaving their heads, because they grew their hair longer to look arty, to look non-conformist. When there was like the short back and sides military haircut, you know, the side part, etc., was popular at the time for Nazis. They would grow their hair different to look different. So the idea for the Nazis was, we'll shave their heads, take away that arty look, and make them look like prisoners, make them look like they don't want to. As time progresses, Himmler, who's in charge of the SS, says that they can't even be sent to labour camps where they would just work. He wanted them in concentration camps, the Edelweiss Pirates, the Swing Kids, etc., for 2 to 3 years. And he says, if you find out that the parents are involved in allowing them to be this or encouraging it, send the parents to the concentration camps as well. So the view does change, and by 1944, 13 youths were hanged in Cologne. 6 of them were Edelweiss Pirates. They were believed to have been hung by piano wire. They left the bodies. Piano wire was often obviously a more painful death, a more gruesome one, because the wire cuts in deeper, and it was to send a message to scare future children from joining groups such as the Edelweiss Pirates. At the end of the war, you would think, yeah, the Edelweiss Pirates would have kept going, and whereas there was support for swing music still, the Edelweiss Pirates were not tolerated, because there was like a clean sweep, get rid of any of the past from the Allies. So not just destroy the references to the Nazis, but anything that clung on to life before 1945. So Edelweiss Pirates weren't allowed by the Allies, especially the Soviets. So in East Germany, if you were an Edelweiss Pirate, the Russian side of Germany, you could get a 25-year prison sentence for it. So I hope that helps. Thanks for watching. I hope revision goes well.